All right, everybody. Happy Sunday. Hopefully I didn't bring up too much trauma talking about worst dates. It was supposed to be fun, so if it's fictional, that's fine too. If your current partner took you on your worst date ever, don't mention that one. So maybe too late. Maybe too late for that advice. But hopefully the rest of this talk will be helpful. My name's Kurt. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's just been a great series. I'm so glad you're here for it as we wrap it up, talking about bad dates, mistakes, and heartbreaks. But before we get to that, we do need to collectively not sing, but wish our hostess with the mostest, Leslie Diaz-Burns, happy birthday. So, happy birthday. She made me promise that we would not sing to her. I'm a man of my word. But we're super grateful for you and who you are and how you lead this church in so many ways. So, thanks for hosting. All right, so here's the thing. We're in this series called Relationships, and for the last few weeks, we've been talking about this idea of how does this desire that we all have to connect with other people that's so deep and so strong and so profound that it can often lead us to forget who we are, to pretend, to put on a facade, and keep us actually in an attempt to have a relationship. It can keep us from having the kinds of relationships that we desire, right? That all of us, if we're honest, we can get overwhelmed in this pursuit of partnership or love or connection, that we can often do unloving or unconnecting things, right? We want to have a thriving relationship, and we think that means we have to be perfect, and then we get in a relationship, we realize that they're not perfect, and we're not as so great as we thought, right? Like, it's pretty impossible, it's unattainable. And yet, all throughout this series, as we looked at how do I bring the healthiest me to every we that I'm a part of, how do I pursue and befriend desire as a key relational aspect, how do we pursue this reality that our sexuality determines so much of our spirituality, and those things are actually designed by God in us to play in tandem, right? That all throughout the narratives, we have discovered that when we come into a clear understanding of our relationship to God, right, that we are radically and incredibly loved. Every single one of you is incredibly loved by God exactly for who you are, as you are, that determines and reflects and really directs our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with that God, if we choose to have one, and our relationship with one another. And that Jesus, when he walked the planet, was so clear that this idea that we can all still get caught in, right? That there's this duality between our bodies and our souls, or between our physical, the horizontal relational realities of our life and our vertical religious spiritual realities, because actually it's all the same game. That if you want to be good with God, God cares about your relationships with other humans because they're made in God's image, right? And so the question we're going to ask today is that when the weight of everyday life closes in, is love really enough, right? Is this idea of love that Jesus talked about really actually enough when you've faced a breakup or a bad date, or you've made a mistake, or your heart has been broken, right? Because all of us have experienced relational bumps and bruises and breakdowns along the way in every area of our relational world. You may be in one right now. You may be starting up again in a new relationship after having a breakup. You may be sitting here wondering if that breakup is coming after the gathering. Please don't break up with someone after church. That's bad. That's not good move. Okay, so, but all of us, right? All of us, no matter who we are, how spiritual we are, how long we've been in a relationship, we all have those stories. We all have those moments. And the reality is that broken hearts happen in every relational arena of our life, right? Not just romantic, but family, parenting, with your job, and even, yes, with church relationships, that we can experience broken hearts in those areas, because that is the nature of relationship, is that it draws us to another. And even in our church, over the last few months, after we had a pretty intense series this past July talking about what does the Bible say about different things, and we were clear about our desire to be a church that's for all people. There have been people in our church that have decided that this is no longer the church for them because of that, and that can bring out heartbreak, right? That can make you sad or angry, and I've felt all of those emotions, and it's okay to get sad, it's okay to get angry, and name the feelings that you have in relational breakdowns, but you don't want to get bitter. And there's a very clear distinction, right? It's okay to get angry. It's okay to get sad. It's okay to wonder why and ask all those questions. But what you don't want to do is either avoid those questions or let those questions lead you to a place where your heart gets hard and you choose to get bitter. So in case you have to leave early, that's what we're talking about today, right? If the bottom line is simply this, right? If we're not careful in how we heal from our broken hearts, right, we will leave our next relationship holding the bag for our last relationship. We will inevitably, maybe even unconsciously, expect the next person that we're in a relationship, the next boss, the next partner, the next roommate, the next spouse, the next church we go to hold the expectations that we've clearly unprocessed from our previous relationships. And so, how do we walk through that reality? I remember I was in sixth grade, and when I was growing up, middle school started in seventh grade. So we had junior high, it's 2 grades. The worst 2 years of your life, but it was 2 grades. That's why they made it only 2. But at the end of sixth grade, our church I grew up at, we had a hill kind of on our church property, and we thought it'd be so fun to do a big end of summer slip and slide. Now, this was way back in the 1990s, so signing release forms and all that kind of stuff didn't exist. And so we're just sliding down this thing. It was so much fun. They just put soap and oil and water, and you're just going crazy. And all these sixth grade boys are like, cool, that's boring. Like, let's surf down it, right? All this stuff. And we keep trying to do harder and harder tricks. And now, having been a youth pastor and now a parent myself, I'm like, where were the adults in this story? I legitimately do not remember adults being present. They were just excited to have us do something because school was starting soon. And I remember, it's always the last time you try something that's when you get hurt, right? Like, I did it right like 5, 6, 7 times. And I was sliding down. I'm like, I'll go left foot forward, because I'm right-footed. And I fall, and I go to, catch myself, but it's a slip and slide, remember? And so I put my arm down, and it just kind of like, whoosh, and just rotates backwards. And I just cranked my collarbone, right? Just ripped it in half by twisting it. Really great. You're welcome. Happy Sunday morning. And that was the night before the first week of school. So I'm trying to work it out. My mom's having me rotate it. We finally go to the doctor on Wednesday, the day before school starts. And I'm like, yeah, it's just not getting better. I thought maybe I popped my shoulder out of socket. And I'm like, oh no, let's take an x-ray. Sure enough, your collarbone doesn't even connect anymore. And you've now ground it down. So it's just sticking out there. And my mom's feeling terrible. And so I'm like, well, what do we do? Do we have surgery? Is this a thing we can recover from? They're like, well, there's not really anything we could do. It's such a weird part in your body, and you're so young, it'll grow back. But we think you should wear this infinity-shaped brace. And if you've ever broken your collarbone, you know where I'm going with this. It looks like an infinity, but you put your arms through it and you click it in the back to kind of keep your collarbone straight. And if you have ever gone to middle school, that was for me when we started having gym class where you change into your gym clothes. And I had this thing that I put my arms through and click in the back, and middle schoolers are terrible people, right? And so it set me up for a lot of really, really great jokes in my direction. And so I didn't have a girlfriend for all of middle school because of that moment, because everybody thought I was wearing a bra, right? And so this was the moment, oh man, this is great. I'm super excited for this moment in middle school, right? Super awkward, wasn't my favorite. But the thing that's the reason I tell you that story is because all they could do is let it heal. And the choice was mine to kind of wear this funky apparatus to kind of help it heal as best it can. I still have a little bit of a bump on this side, but all they can do is give it time and let it heal. And when it comes to our hearts, right? Often that's what we assume is the only choice and the only option we have is just give it time and hope for the best. And yet what we're going to see in the scriptures is that actually there's a better way. The way of Jesus actually invites us to consider a different path relationally so that if we don't want, a marriage like all the marriages we've seen, if we don't want to date and have relationships like the majority of daters, that we actually can choose to do something different, right? So as we get into it, right, throughout this series, we've looked at the Bible, specifically New Testament has a ton to say about relationships, super helpful insight, right? The Bible talks a lot about that. Jesus talked a lot about it. Ultimately, his overarching command of what it means to be connected to God was a relational command, right? But when it comes to dating advice, the New Testament and the Old Testament, for that matter, are pretty silent. Not because God doesn't care about you if you're single or if you're dating, but because in the first century there really wasn't a dating culture. There wasn't a single culture. People were betrothed to someone that their parents wanted to get in a relationship with, usually economically. So that's not a good dating strategy, okay? So as we talk about this, we are taking a little bit of liberty to go, hey, what does God say about us and relationships, and kind of applying that to this kind of space in our life. So just to be clear, all right? So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 5. In the seat back pocket directly in front of you, there is a copy of the scriptures that we'd love for you to grab. On this one, it's on page 618. And Luke was a researcher who researched all kinds of stories about Jesus' life and people that traveled with him. And we say this all the time, that if you don't have a copy of the scriptures that you can read and understand, we would encourage you can take this copy of the Bible home with you today. That's totally exciting for us to replace Bibles after gatherings, because it means someone now can engage with this book that is so transformational. So Jesus is talking, and he's challenged about a couple different things, right? And he's kind of speaking to some relational dynamics, some religious dynamics, but he gives this illustration that I think is super helpful for what we're talking about today. And in Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 36, it says this. And Jesus gave them this illustration. Right? No one tears a piece of cloth from a new garment and uses it to patch an old garment. Now, we would go, yeah, that's actually how we do it now. But back then, that wouldn't be how they would do it, because, clothing and garments back then were much more expensive comparatively, right? For the new garment would then be ruined, and the new patch wouldn't even match the old garment. Some translations say it would actually pull away and make the tear worse. And then it says, again, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. For the new wine, because if you know wine, it has to expand with the oxygen, and the tannins have a good time and all that stuff, right? It would burst the wineskins, spilling the wine and ruining the wineskins. The clearest, modern day take on this, have you ever seen Instagram or TikTok videos of people ruining their Thanksgiving by filling up, if they're going to fry a turkey, filling up a can with oil, heating it up, and then putting the turkey in, and it spills over, right? That's kind of the image of disaster that Jesus is trying to communicate in the first century. So that helps you kind of get there, right? But then Jesus says something so interesting that, to be honest with you, as long as I've heard and even taught this passage, I've never seen how this last line in Luke's account of Jesus' story plays in, but I think it's important for us today, specifically around this topic, right? He says, no, new wine must be stored in new wineskins, but no one who drinks the old wine seems to want the new wine. The old is just fine, they say. And as I read that, thinking about this topic, thinking about relational dynamics, thinking about stuff for you and for me, and when our hearts are broken or when things don't go our way, there's something about all of us that when we're feeling that pain, we always reach back for what was familiar. That we would rather go back to the old than to explore something new. And that can be true spiritually. It can be true relationally. It can be true with yourself. It can be true in your career, right? That Jesus is talking about this thing that's true in all of us as humans, that it's so much easier to wish for the good old days rather than to create a new reality. It's so much easier. He says so many people, right, when they know that there's new wine available, they're like, no, I'll just stick with what I know. And when it comes to our relationships, oftentimes sticking with what you know really depends on what you actually know, right? That you can actually learn great things from bad experiences, but there's something to be learned from people that have dated well, have had healthy marriages, right, that you want to aspire to. There's something about learning from what to do in your relationships, not just what not to do. And so when it comes to this idea of dating, for those of you that are dating, you're dating again, you're single, you're looking to date, the lobby is a great place to find someone afterwards. I just want to help us all, because for some of us, it's been a while since you've dated. It's been a while since I've dated. And so I didn't depend on my own wisdom in this. I found a great study of dating in America over the last 2 years in Newsweek, where they interviewed a number of people in different relational spheres that are dating again in different ways. So just kind of help us level the playing field. These are some of the quotes of some of the people that they featured in this article. Benjamin was a guy, and he said this: "His online dating is capital the worst." All right, so he's make sure you know how it's written. The worst, all caps. All right. Each time I ask friends ranging from early 20s to late 40s. How's the temperature in the dating pool? I'm met with borderline hostility. He says, for all the talk of how easy this dating app is supposed to make it for potential dates, the impression I'm left with is that everyone is swimming in a pool that they all collectively took a dump in, and instead of shocking the water and getting out, everyone decides this is just the pool option we have, so they're swimming in the sewage and actually adding to it. Wow. Benjamin is not holding back, right? Because, hey, it's horrible. But if you want to find a date, this is your option, right? Shawnee says this, I saw a meme once that read, the question used to be, how long do we date before we have sex? And now the question is, how long do we hook up before we can actually call it dating, before this is an actual relationship? Aiden writes, we don't communicate our feelings to one another because instead we play this guessing game with no intention of being the person that shares how they really feel, because that means you actually care and that makes you weak. Whoever cares the least wins. All right, that's one person's perspective. And finally, Rebecca writes this, I'm definitely as much to blame as any of the men that I've met. I'm often unwilling to make space in my life for a relationship in order for it to thrive. Maybe all of that will change when I meet here's the key word, right person. So this is what some of you are like, yes, finally, somebody said it, right? Like that is the theme, right? For many of us. And whether we've dated recently or a while ago, we've all had those moments where like, man, this pursuit of dating can feel so complicated. It can feel so disheartening. It can feel so vulnerable and even repulsing at times. Like, why am I even doing this? And the reality is that what all of those friends that are sharing in that article are representing is that there's something about this whole construct that is not that healthy. It's not that life-giving. It's not even that intriguing. And it's this fictitious endpoint that we all imagine and desire, this hope for partnership and connection and intimacy. That's what we crave, but it puts us through this ringer that almost feels intolerable. And before you're afraid that I'm going to say, so kiss dating goodbye, I'm not going to say that, right? Because the reason that it's a problem is not what dating is, but it's how collectively many of us have decided to do it, right? And I know what you're thinking, like, Kurt, it's been like at least 20 years since you had to ask someone out on a date, and you're right. But I do know that what we went through, even though we were younger, was very different than what most of our friends did with their dating. That what Katie and I pursued both before each other and then collectively together was very, very different than what many of our friends went through. And fortunately for us, we did not suffer some of the same heartbreak and trauma that many of our friends have gone through, and many of you might have gone through as well, as I've heard your stories and listened to what you've walked through. Dating can be, let's face it, really, really painful. And yet, in its essence, right, dating is risky because relationships are risky. Love is risky, right? And dating by design, to be done well, and this shift might be helpful for some of you, right? That if you shift your perspective of dating as a search to find someone, but dating as preparation, it actually changes the perspective, because, as we're going to talk about this more in just a second, how you do relationships anywhere becomes how you do relationships everywhere. That your dating, right, is designed to actually grow something in you, but for something to grow, you have to be willing to let some of your insecurities show, right? That dating certainly will surface those. It might even surface some anxieties, right? But we actually want to look for a way that dating can actually move us into the person that God wants us to be, because dating is like working out a muscle, right? That when you want to have a healthy relationship, you want to have things like self-control. You want to have things like courage. You want to have things like honesty. You want to have things like, I don't know, time management and planning. All of those things are useful in dating. But if you choose to date in a way that avoids all of those kinds of things, you miss out on the greatest thing that dating can actually give you, which isn't an eventual partner. It actually is a better you, right? It prepares you to be someone, to be the kind of person that the person that you're looking for may be looking for, right? As Rebecca shared, right? This myth of the right person, that all of a sudden I'll find the right person and my personality and my preferences will radically change to match this right person's perspective. When they show up, then I'll be a better person. The answer is no, you won't. It's okay. You're great. I love you. But that isn't true for any of us, right? It just doesn't work that way. And yet for many of us to actually name this emotional turmoil actually is a really helpful thing, but it's so often unmodeled for us, right? That we can step into these spaces and actually use and flex and grow and strengthen our relational muscles through our dating experience in a way that prepares us to be a better person to be in relationship with later, regardless of what your past relational experiences have been. That expanding our emotional vocabulary around this topic can be incredibly helpful because it helps us to name what we're feeling, what we're walking through, and it keeps us from trying to fix the relationship and the emotional feeling on the other side of us, right? If you're scared, right? If it feels unsafe, if it's difficult to show up and be sad, right? To bring those to a friend, to your spouse, to your person you're dating, or even to God. And so instead we just pretend to have it all together or pretend to be fine or to be happy, right? We miss out on what God is trying to teach us. Because when we pretend to be happy, but inside we're shaking with fear, we actually will never live into the promise that Jesus gives us, that perfect love casts out all fear. That when you are in a relationship, right, that actually is loving, ultimately with God, with yourself, and with another, that fear goes away, even though you might face things that cause you to need to be courageous. But there's safety and there's not fear in that relationship. But when we live and push down those feelings of fear or uncertainty, or I don't know if this is going the way I thought it was going to go, I don't know if he's the right person or she's the right person, right? This doesn't seem like it's clicking the way it used to or the way I had hoped it to. But if I say that, then I'll be alone again. Oh my gosh, I can't do that, right? Whenever we push those feelings down, what that does to our body and to our brain is it creates neural pathways that tell us that it's okay to be afraid in relationships, that begins to feel acceptable and even normalized. And that sets us up for deep pain and deep rejection and deep trauma in the future. And yet for all of us, I've done that. I've done that, right? But to name what we're feeling, to say, hey, something new is happening. And I'm not going to try to force it into old wineskins. I'm not going to try to put something new into the old relational habit and pattern that I've gotten so used to. I'm not going to settle for, oh, old is fine. I'm actually going to begin writing a new story in my relationships. That takes courage. So the bottom line for today is this, right? In all of our relational spaces, wherever you are, don't make a new relationship pay for what an old relationship cost you. That's the idea that Jesus is trying to help us understand. All right? Don't make a new relationship pay for what an old relationship costs you. Because when we get hurt, when we get rejected, our expectations go unmet for too long. Again, this is true in dating. It's true if you're married and you're trying to still date your partner, which is a great idea, right? If you're dating again when it didn't work out in your previous relationship, we have to monitor our hearts to be very aware of when we tell ourselves a story that's going to make us bitter, that's going to lead to a hardening of our heart, where we hold someone else accountable for something that someone else did, right? That we can do this subconsciously, sometimes we can do it intentionally, but no matter how that shows up in our life, it's something to really pay attention to. Because bitterness actually lies to you, and it lies to me. Bitterness disguises itself as power, and it makes you and I feel secure. And if we think about or to even imagine a future story where we would let go of that bitterness, we actually feel vulnerable. That bitterness that we've created and held on to, right, helps us feel safe even though it makes us less alive. Right? And the truth is that love, regardless of how it looks in your life in any relational category, that love, a real intimate relationship, a real connection with another person cannot exist without some level of vulnerability. You have to let go a little bit of control. You have to let go and let yourself be open to being at risk of being hurt again in order to be truly loved. Right? To choose to engage in a genuine new relationship, to love again and open yourself up to the possibility of love again, is to choose to be a little bit less powerful in a positive story rather than remain feeling powerful but trapped in a negative story. That is the invitation of new wineskins when it comes to our relationships. Because Jesus said over and over again, we see this all throughout the scriptures, that bitterness hardens our hearts. It hardens our hearts so that we feel like we have the power to not be hurt, but we lose the power to feel, to love, and to be real with another when we cling to bitterness. It limits our ability to experience the full life that Jesus promises us. So my encouragement for all of us is when it comes to new relationships, right? And this is hard. I'm not saying this is easy. I've had to work through this even in the last few weeks in my own life, right? That you don't hold new relationships accountable for what old relationships cost you. Because for all of us, right, we have this thing where we think all relationships operate the same way. And while there are kind of 4 consistent relational stages throughout any relationship, most of us stop short of the actual desire that we have because it requires us to go through something challenging. So real quick, there's kind of 4 relational stages. The first one is, oh, hey, right? That's the first one. And that can last from about 6 seconds to about 6 months, all right? So it depends on you, but that, oh, hey is that first relational stage, right? It's a wonderful stage. And the fuel for the oh, hey relationships, stage is attraction. Like someone just caught your eye, right? It could be a relational, pursuit with romantic intentions. It could be a new neighbor where you're like, hey, I like this neighbor way better than our last neighbor. It could be in all different, spheres of life, right? But that initial attraction where you're just drawn to someone, you don't have a ton of questions yet. There's just something happening, right? The stars are aligning, the way they look tonight, right? That whole thing, right? That is a great stage. And again, it can be short-lived or it can last for a while, right? But there's something about that there's not a lot of expectation, there's not a lot of cost, it's just attraction. The second stage, right, is the oh yeah stage, right? Like these are the spaces where chemistry begins to show up. You've done enough life experience together, you learned about their story, you have similar interests. Again, this could be a friendship, it could be romantic, it could be at work. There's chemistry. I like this job. I like the people that I work with. I like, going to the pool with this person. I like going on bike rides with them. We have the same interest in music or food, whatever it might be, right? There's chemistry. There's things that bond us together beyond just physical. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a wise and mature stage to get to. And it's a wise and mature stage to move through before sexual intimacy engages in the relationship, because nothing ruins chemistry like unmet expectations, right? Nothing ruins chemistry like unclear communication. Nothing ruins chemistry like, oh, I thought we were further along than you did. Oh, I thought that was just like, we had extra time, right? And for most of us, if we're honest, this is where we feel like the relationship's going well. This is going awesome. Like they're the best. Like, I don't know what was wrong with all those other people I was dating. What a joker I was. Like, this is what God has had in plan for me all along. And that might be true, but it also could just mean you're in the first 2 stages of a relationship. So you just haven't had any problems yet. You just haven't been around each other long enough or been honest enough with one another to discover the things that you thought were bad in the last relationship. That you've just been on your best behavior because it's only been 6 months, but now your patience is wearing thin. Because the third stage of relationship is the uh-oh stage. Uh-oh, this wasn't what I thought. Uh-oh, he's not as great as I pictured. Uh-oh, she's just like my last girlfriend, right? Whatever it might be. And in this moment, right, chemistry can feel like it goes away because challenge shows up. And yet, here's my encouragement, is if you have found yourself in an uh-oh stage of your relationship, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It doesn't feel good in the moment. It doesn't feel awesome, right? But what it means is you've actually shown up authentically enough that now there's something to be angry about. But we often think those emotions are negative, that those are bad things. I remember I was dating a girl in high school, and my dad asked me, hey, so like, how often do you guys fight? No, we never fight. It's great. Like, we're awesome. I think this is going to be the one. Like, and he just looked at me and went, no, it's not. Like, so clear. Like, I know it's been 2 years. Like, how have you not had a big fight yet? And like a prophetic, promise to his son, the moment he said that, we started having all these fights, and we ended up breaking up, which was great because then I, got to date Katie. But the point is what he was saying is, oh, you've just been playing. You haven't been real, and neither have they. That there's this challenge phase where we can think it's negative, but friends, let me remind you, challenge and conflict is neutral. It can be negative if we choose to avoid it, to blame, or to push it all on the other person, or conflict can be incredibly positive, create courage, develop consistency, elevate our communication, because we have to figure this out. And usually, I say usually because I don't know everybody, right? But most couples, I would say even all the couples I know, never get to the fourth stage without going through stage 3. That in some ways they are linear. It's not always up and to the right. And once you get to stage 4, you never go back to stage 3. Kate and I go to stage 3 almost on the weekly basis, if not multiple times a week, right? We go back to, we didn't clearly talk about that, or why do you do that, or why do you chew so loud, whatever it might be, right? So I got my adenoids taken out, my head's hollow, it's a whole thing. So, right? But if you don't go through the challenge phase, you can never actually get to the oh wow stage 4. Because the fuel for oh wow is commitment. The fuel for stage 4 is, hey, I expect challenges. I expect us to face hard things. But there's a new way we're living into our relationship together. I had a conversation with a guy a couple weeks ago where we were talking, and I said, here's the thing. The goal of your life as you're kind of repairing some stuff in your relationship is that you get to the place where there's so much trust built up again that ultimately you can communicate to the person you're in a relationship with, hey, you can expect me to make a mistake. Now, I don't want to make the same mistakes multiple times, right, and not clear the pattern, but that there's enough trust in the bank again that we're not just good until I screw up, because maybe it's going to happen, right? So that's ultimately what the challenge phase leading to stage 4 builds for you. You know you're in the oh wow stage when the commitment you have to the person you're in a relationship with, again, could be romantic, could just be family, could be a job, could be a friendship, right? Where you can name the relationship dynamics that require you to be real with the expectations that you have with one another and what you contribute to that relationship. That's when you know you're in stage 4, right? Is that you're not afraid when you go back to the stage because you've already navigated it together. So these are the questions to ask, right? Is what are the relational aspects that we're attracted to, right? Stage 1. What characteristics do I have chemistry with? If you're dating or you're dating again, to ask the questions like, there might be things that are attractive, but there's got to be something that's deeper than that. And if you don't know what those are, you will mistake attraction for chemistry. If you don't know what actually binds you relationally to another person, you'll just be like, but they're so good looking, which is great. But again, to move from stage 1 to stage 2, you have to ask the questions, what am I attracted to? What creates chemistry in my relationships, right? Where do I feel safe enough to do the work to get through a challenge? What needs to happen in a relationship? Because if you start in a relationship, you're working with someone and you're like, this is a fun job, I like this job, and then you have like stage 3 challenge immediately, day 1, maybe that's a problem, right? These should kind of build in order. If all you're doing is fighting, that's a different thing than, hey, I know how to work through these challenges. But what is it that makes me feel safe enough in the relationship in order to work through the challenge in the relationship? When we were preparing for the talk on sexuality last week, we were listening to an interview with Jenna Mountain, who's a sex therapist, and she made this phrase that they were talking about sexual trauma and abuse and betrayal, but it really, in my view, works for all relationships, is when trauma has taken voice and choice away from someone, that she leads her therapy clients through a practice where I don't, if I were the one that had broken trust, right? I say I'm sorry for breaking trust, but then I stop talking, and the other person is the one that has to tell me what that breach of trust cost them. Because I can say, oh, I'm so sorry. I can tell that makes you scared. Or I can just talk and talk and talk, and I do this often, to just get my way out of that uncomfortable place when I've broken trust, whether it was, with my kids or with Katie or with a friend or whatever, hey, I blew it. I can almost make excuses for myself. And so obviously she's talking about a very sensitive and volatile situation, but I think it's true in every relational aspect. When I've broken trust, all I'm to do is to say, I'm sorry. And then we pause. And we give the other person their voice back and let them communicate how it felt to them. So much so, we were watching that, we're like, oh, this is going to change how we parent. Because oftentimes we'll have our kids will get in a fight. Again, this happened like 6 times before we got to church this morning. Just to be clear. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? And what do you say? Yes, we forgive because, Jesus. But actually that cheapens that relational rebuilding moment. Right? To actually simply say, hey, I'm really sorry. And then the other person in the relationship, whether it's brother or sister or whatever, said, oh, yeah, that really hurt when you took my Spider-Man toy or colored on my coloring sheet or pushed me down, right? I hear you. I hear that hurt. Will you forgive me? And again, it's different at 6 than it is at 36 or 16 or 56, right? And so as we grow and develop to be able to use that kind of language to say, this is what holds me back from moving to stage 4, to moving to that commitment stage where we can actually experience the fullness of relational realities that God invites us to, is because we're willing to work through those kinds of relational challenges, right? So if you're dating, rather than just looking for someone to date, to ask the question, what is this person, this imagined person, what is the person that I'm looking for? And how can I begin to cultivate those practices? Not to become someone new. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, right? But if I want someone that's committed, they're probably going to want someone that also is committed. How do I build commitment in that relational muscle? If I want someone that's honest, how do I develop honesty in my life? Because like I said, how you do relationships anywhere becomes how you do relationships everywhere. It is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to be a person that lacks integrity at work, but be trustworthy at home. It's extremely difficult to always be popping off and being angry with your kids, but never let that come out at your spouse. It is very, very difficult to be one way with the guys, but then when you go out on a date to be prim and proper. It just tears your soul apart when you live out of integrity. So, a couple helpful steps that might be helpful if you are in a dating spot that might help you kind of figure out how to date with clarity and integrity. And then 3 steps on how to bounce back from a mistake or a heartbreak, right? So it says this, right? These are what I would encourage you. If you're dating or you're dating again, these 3 things are going to make the next relationship potentially better than your last one. The first is to know your worth. Again, it always comes back to knowing who God says you are, right? Don't bend or blend to become someone that you're not in order to get someone you want to be with, right? That if someone says, oh, are you too good for that? You can answer confidently, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And that may lead the relationship to be over. Or it may limit what you thought the relationship was, but actually what it did is you didn't lose it. It just clarified what it actually was all along. As the great prophet Kelsey Ballerini says, right? You may miss them, but you will miss you more. So know your worth, right? The second thing is tell the truth. And this isn't just for dating. I think this is true for all relationships, right? But don't do anything that makes you a liar for life. Don't do anything that puts off being honest because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings and it just prolongs the pain by hiding or delaying the inevitable. To be honest, if you want to go out with someone, ask them out on a date. Have a plan. Make a schedule. Be specific. You just want to hang out sometime? No, right? Be honest. Be honest. I wasn't going to say this, but I think I should. If someone slides into your DMs and that's their way of connecting with you, the first interaction sets the table for that relationship. Say, hey, I would love for you to ask me out sometime. Here's my number if you want to ask me out. Call me up. Tell the truth. If you know something's coming to an end, but you're waiting to find someone else to be with before you tell the person you're currently with that it's over, you are lying. And you set up that relationship for heartbreak, and you tear your soul apart. Tell the truth. And then the third one is don't mistreat another person, even if they seem to not mind being mistreated. I know that sounds harsh, but as I talk to many of you and students and many others, right, we can convince ourselves that we don't mind being mistreated or that we don't deserve all that much when we're actually just afraid of being alone. So if you're trying to follow Jesus and you're dating or really in any of our relationships, don't mistreat another person. Jesus says that's the most important thing you can do in this life, is not mistreat another person, even if they don't seem to mind. Because we are not following culture's recommendations. We are following the pattern of Christ. And Paul writes this to a church in Colossae that is dealing with figuring out what does it look like to live this life in relationship with other people after the model of Jesus. And he says this, it's so profound. Colossians 3:12-15, it says, since God chose you to be his holy people who he loves, right? He's reminding you of who you are. He's elevating your status. Hey, remember, you're not living by everybody else's rules, right? You must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, right? So those 5 or 6 are great places to start, right? Tender-hearted, merciful, kind, humble, gentle, and patient. Anybody want to go out with someone like that? Anybody want to be in a relationship like that? Anybody want to work for someone like that? Anybody want to parent someone like that? Anyone want to be parented by someone like that? My kids sure do, right? They miss it. Make allowances for other people's faults, he says. It doesn't mean you stay in an abusive relationship or that you go back to unhealthy patterns, but you make allowances for other people's fault and you forgive others who offend you. Just to be clear, you can forgive from afar. Some of you might set you free in that one line. You can forgive from afar. Trust and forgiveness are different things. But he says, hey, forgive those who offend you. Remember that the Lord forgave you, so you should forgive others. Above all, again, he uses the same language of putting it on like it's clothes. You got to get up every morning. What am I going to wear today? I'm going to clothe myself in love that binds us together in perfect harmony. So that the peace of Christ that comes from his rule in your hearts, right? That's where we get peace as we follow Jesus' path, that the peace comes from Christ's rule in your hearts. For we are members of one body. We're all actually connected, and that's why we shouldn't mistreat one another. And we're called to live in peace. To truly live in peace, sometimes you have to go past just keeping the peace. You have to not be afraid to go to stage 3. Say, hey, this is important. Right? So when Paul is writing this to these early Christians, I think it applies to us in our relationships. For some of us, the most healthy thing we could do is to actually set some boundaries with some people so that we actually can experience peace or actually can forgive because we need to be separated from them for a while. That we can actually find kindness and patience and gentleness reemerge in our life because we distance ourselves from toxic people in our life. That we break up with them or that we don't go back to them when we break up with someone else. I think these are really, really important things that actually speak to our soul, that actually help us become who Jesus wants us to be. And so when it comes from bouncing back from a bad date or a bad relationship, or recovering from a mistake, or healing a broken heart, there's also 3 things that I would recommend. Now, again, this is not to minimize anyone's pain, right? I've gone through plenty of my own, right? But when we are trying to heal, we don't just wait and see what happens like they did with my collarbone. You can actually take some steps, but that doesn't mean you won't have to be patient and persistent, right? It's actually not dissimilar from taking a Polaroid picture. I love that these are kind of coming into fashion again. It's like we have all this digital stuff and we can see it immediately, and yet, it's trendy for high schoolers to be like, let's take a picture that takes 25 seconds to develop and you're stuck with it, right? But that's ultimately a great picture of relationships. So, that's how you look right there. Perfect. But on your seat when you came in, right, you got a picture of a Polaroid picture. And I hope that you can take this and maybe put it somewhere to remind you this week or in the future to not hold new relationships hostage and to make them pay for what old relationships cost you. But as you bounce back, right, when it comes from bouncing back, it isn't all that dissimilar from a Polaroid picture, right? You have to do three things. You have to stay focused on what you want to see, right? With actual film, you have to be pretty still to let it develop, right? Take a picture. So when you're thinking about dating or your heart's broken and you're looking to start a new relationship, to really be clear and focus on what do you want to see? What do you want to see in your life? What do you want your next relationship to be like? Maybe even be specific enough to write it down, to tell yourself the truth. And then you make a thoughtful decision. Now's the time to press the button. Now's the time to take that picture. That's what I want to capture. And then you have to trust the process and wait for it to develop, right? And shake it like a Polaroid picture. But just make sure you're listening, right? But to stay focused on what you want to see, to make a thoughtful decision about your desired future, because you do it one day at a time, one choice at a time. And then you trust the process and wait for it to develop. Because here's the bottom line, is a relationship that works is worth the work. And it's worth the wait. It's worth the wait to see this picture develop of who you're becoming and who God is inviting you to be in relationship with. You don't have to overcomplicate it, but it might require something of you. I would argue it absolutely will. But when you allow yourself to go through the process and trust that what God is doing in you in that time is for your good, because it will make you a better person, which has the highest potential of influencing your future relationships for the better, you'll be glad you did. You'll be glad you did. So maybe you take this and put it somewhere. You can encourage yourself when maybe you're feeling down, or that you have that temptation to hold on to bitterness. You can go, hey, you know what? I'm going to feel what I need to feel. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to name that I'm even angry or disappointed, but I'm not going to let my heart get hard in the illusion of control. But I'm going to stay soft so that I'm open to the love that God might bring my way. Let me pray for you. God, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the truth of your words, Jesus, that it's so easy for us to stick with what is familiar or just to go back to old ways, but you invite us into something new. So for my friends here, that specifically when it comes to their romantic relationships, that they're recently single, or they're still searching and they have gone to other weddings this summer, and they're wondering when it's going to be their turn. Or for those who have this story of being not good enough or not lovable that is in their soul, I pray that they would hear not my words, but your words right now, that you see them, that you love them, that you've designed them exactly as they are. And even when they don't like it, you see them as a masterpiece. And for those of us in relational challenging spaces, whether that's at home or at work or with friendships, where there's a longing for something more, but we find ourselves stuck in a challenging space, would you give us courage to be honest with ourselves and with others? Would we be committed to telling the truth even when it's scary or painful? And would you give us patience to trust the process? And for those in this room or watching later who can hear my voice that wonder if their mistake was too much for your grace, if their choice broke things too badly to be put back together, I pray that they would be reminded of the image that the psalmist says, that you pick up the pieces to make something new, and that new wine doesn't go in old wineskins, and that you are inviting them perhaps into a new space relationally, to trust you, to experience your forgiveness in their life so that they can forgive themselves and they can move forward. God, thank you that you are with us and you know what it's like to be let down, to be betrayed, to be spoken poorly about, all the relational dynamics that we might face in this life. Jesus, you viscerally experienced them. And so we can trust your words and we can believe and follow what you have to say when it comes to our relationships. So remind us of that this week. It's in your name we pray. Amen.